Please join me in welcoming our panelists today. First, right here to my right, we have Mimi Leder. She's the director, has had a long, successful directorial career spanning decades with numerous TV shows, which I think you've heard of. The Leftovers, Vanish, John Doe, ER among them, and several film credits, including The Peacemaker and one of my personal favorites, Deep Impact. Then we have Justin Theroux. He plays Mel Wolfe, who was then the head of the ACLU. Justin's known for his work with David Lynch on Mulholland Drive and Inland Empire, and most recently seen as Kevin Garvey, in HBO's The Leftovers, Tom in The Girl on the Train, and Dr. James Manilray on Netflix as The Maniac. And then we have Daniel Stiepleman. He is the film's screenwriter and the real-life nephew to Justice Ginsburg.
Oh, that's nice. What a happy accident of birth.
Exactly. So I think to start off with, I'd love to ask you, Mimi, how did you get involved with this project?
Well, I was given the script by my manager, my agent, John Levin, Robert Court, and our producer, and Jonathan King, also our producer, president participant, sent me the script, and I immediately read it and felt that I had to do it.
Yeah.
I just felt like I really understood her, having, lived through in a different generation and in a different industry, lived through a lot of discrimination and inequality, and just had to fight the fight in my profession, in my world. And I felt a commonality with Ruth being a woman who's a mother, who's Jewish, who's been in a long-standing marriage, and know what that takes. And breaking the glass ceilings in our own ways for generations to come. And I just felt this is a story about a living icon, someone who who did so much for our country, and changed the world as well for all of us. And I just felt very lucky to have been able to direct this film.
Wonderful. Well, I got to see it earlier this weekend. I think we're lucky to get to watch it. It's fantastic, so you should all definitely check it out. It'll be in theaters in Christmas. So for Daniel, first, nephew to Justice Ginsburg, pretty exciting.
Why is that always first? That's
First. I think growing up, did you realize the impact that Justice Ginsburg was having sort of in the world and our country's laws, both as an attorney and a Supreme Court justice? Was that part of sort of the dialogue in your home, or?
Well, mostly I just found it confusing because, I was born after all the events of this film. And so people would say, oh, that's your aunt. She changed the world. And I'm looking across like the Thanksgiving table, and she's just very quietly, very slowly, eating her turkey dinner. And I'm going, her? Really? Because I had a vision in my head, I think like a lot of us, of what a feminist from the 70s was, right? It's Gloria Steinem standing in front of a crowd, bringing everyone to their feet. And here's my quiet aunt, who changed the world. And part of what I came to appreciate and understand from writing the movie is that, my voice is very loud, is that sustainable change takes a Gloria Steinem to shift the culture, and it takes a Ruth Bader Ginsburg to change the laws and the institutions.
You were quoted saying, one of the great joys of writing the movie was that it felt like I got to really know her for the first time. So what were some of the surprising things you discovered as you wrote the screenplay, or as you sort of dug in and put this together?
Yeah, I mean, she's my aunt, but she's 50 years older than I am, right? So Marty was 13 years older than my mom. My older brother's 10 years older than I am. So I grew up with her grandkids. And so, for me, like I said, she's a very private person. And so to get that, it's not that there was like, oh, what, this one thing that was so surprising. It's just, if you think about I assume everyone's relationships with their aunts and uncles, like you don't really sit for hours and talk about like, what did you and your husband fight about? And how did you make up? And what did you, and you certainly probably never had to write a sex scene between them. And so,
There's no detail in the script. None.
Oh yeah, so we had a screening the other night in DC, and the moderator asked Ruth how she felt about the sex scene, and she goes, "Marty would have loved it." That has nothing to do with the answer to your question, but it's really funny.
That is the answer.
So it was just a matter of asking the hard questions. For my wife and I, when we got married, we very consciously said to each other, "Let's be like them. Let's be Ruth and Marty." So I was like on this stealth mission to figure out how did they build this marriage where they were, not only did they both have incredible careers, which I think is something we're getting better at these days, but they were also equal partners at home, where they Marty did all the cooking because Ruth was a god-awful cook, but they shared the load of like getting food on the table and taking care of the kids and getting the kids to school every day and all that. And statistically, we still suck at that. And so understanding how they pulled that off with such confidence and love and mutual support was the goal of writing the movie.
Yeah. Speaking of that scene, the bedroom scene, why was it important to include that scene in the movie? Why portray this aspect of her life specifically?
Well, because everybody has made love since the beginning of time, and everyone's human, and everyone makes love. And it was really important to show her as a real, authentic woman. And it was really interesting, though, not shooting the scene with Army and Felicity. It was cutting the scene that was, made me have to think. Because, you guys haven't seen the film, but it's very tame. It's not even really a love scene. It's very tame, and I had it far more risque. I had her sitting on him, and they got into it a little. And then I was in the editing room going, oh no, I don't know if R.B.G will like this. And you don't.
Her nephew wouldn't have.
Right. He was like, no. And it was really interesting. So it was deeper and more contemporary than it is in the film. And then I just said, no, let's make this really simple. But the point of the story is, we're at dinner after we showed it to her with this tame version. And her official biographer went, oh my God, the sex scene. And I was like, and she goes, oh, it's just so much. And I said,
whoa.
I was like, whoa. I said, really? I said, you should have seen it before. And then she said to her, well, what do you think, Ruth? And all eyes go to R.B.G. And she goes, I'm fine with it. And it was really funny. Anyway.
For Justin, so I know you and Mimi have worked together before on The Leftovers, but how did you get involved with this project? Was it through your relationship with Mimi or through a different sort of avenue in?
It was, I think, yes. Mimi sent me the script and said, there's this part that I'd love for you to play, and blah, blah, blah. So I said, of course. I read it, and then, of course.
Eventually.
Good.
No, he didn't read it.
I just read my parts, and then eventually.
Didn't it sound cool? So you read your parts, sounded great. And a lot of the characters that you've taken on have been sort of eccentric characters in different ways, but fictional characters. What was it like playing someone who obviously is a real life person, and how did you sort of prepare for the role and get to know Mel as a person?
I think of him as an eccentric character. He was an odd, duck kind of. We didn't have any source material on him really. There was no, the Felicity and Army were able to look at photos and videos and hear audio recordings. We didn't have any of that. We sort of knew what his trajectory was in his career. Just there was sort of newspaper clippings. There was the internet about him. So I got to play around a little bit more, but he was kind of a controversial figure at the ACLU. And I know you haven't seen the film, but he was a bit of a misogynist, even though he was very progressive and forward-leaning and taking on a lot of very important issues as it relates to sort of constitutional stuff, the First Amendment, and some civil rights issues. But feminism wasn't really on his radar, at least advancing it through the ACLU. And I also didn't have to do any sort of mimicry, because we couldn't find the guy, frankly.
Right.
Justin steals every scene in the movie.
He does.
Well, the ones he's in, anyway.
Yeah, he can do anything.
Oh my
Just stop showing up.
I guess for Daniel, Mimi, how true to life was the relationship that you portrayed between Ruth and Marty? And there's so much of it that are these sort of quiet moments of their domestic life, but then also them sort of pioneering together within the legal profession. And how much of that was really true exactly to, it's based on a true story, but.
Well, I would say that, the justice worked very closely with Daniel. He can speak to that everything, she was a stickler on the law. And it was, not being a family member, but just being a director and wanting to portray a marriage that is long-standing and a real equal partnership. I really understood that. And I really, when you hire incredible actors, no matter how incredible they are, you never know if it's really going to work. Mm-hmm. You never know if the chemistry is going to really hit. And it did. And a lot of the relationship is, I believe, really truly authentic in the feelings of love and equal partnership. And it was important to get the stuff in between the lines, the looks, the feels.
But the lines are pretty good too, right?
Yeah, they're okay.
A lot of polishing.
That's right.
Yeah, and Marty
asking for that.
did bring her the case, and it was really important to all of us, and especially R.B.G. to tell the story the way it happened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And why did you specifically choose this period of her life to focus on for the film, for the screenplay? Because she's obviously had an enormous and impactful career across decades.
Which was a point she made when I raised it with her, actually. No, I heard the story of this case the first time. It was at my uncle's funeral. A friend of his got up and gave a eulogy, and this was 2010, and he mentioned the only case that Ruth and Marty ever argued together. And it was like, wow, it's the two of them fighting in court for exactly what they figured out how to live at home, real equality. And it was the first case she ever argued. Mm-hmm. And it was the first case to convince a federal court that women should be considered people under the U.S. Constitution, despite the fact that they argued it by representing a man. So there was so much about the story that I just thought was fascinating. I thought, this would make a great movie. And then I thought, what kind of asshole am I? I'm sitting here at my uncle's funeral, mining his life for material. That's not like a thing you can do. And so I was like, okay, clearly I can't write this. And I sat on it for over a year. But then finally, I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And so I called Ruth and I said, I'd like your permission. I'd love your help. And she raised the exact same point you did. I argued other cases. I argued bigger cases. I argued cases in front of the Supreme Court. But once I said, yeah, but this is the one that's about you and Marty. This is a movie about a marriage. Then I was going to say she got excited, but what she actually said was, well, if that's how you want to spend your time. So.
Fair enough.
That's Ruth Bader Ginsburg for great enthusiasm.
One of my favorite scenes in the movie was the moot court scene in the home beforehand. I thought it was a really great way to incorporate Polly Murray into the film as well, and her sort of impact as a pioneer in the spaces too. Was this something that really happened? The moot court scene, was this based on anything, or is this completely brought in to sort of show the dynamic and the preparation?
No, at first I agree. It's my favorite scene in the movie, but it came initially just out of need as a writer, because what was happening in the first draft was you're getting up to the end towards the third act, the end of the movie, you're building up to the climax in court. We'll see you in court. And then she goes marching into court, and then the whole movie has to stop to explain how federal court works, and it was just killing me on the page. It was like
and tax law.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone would have gone to sleep.
And so what I finally figured out was, if I could put in a moot court 20 minutes earlier, I can teach the audience how this is all going to work, so that by the time we get to the end, I don't have to stop to explain it all. And so it's like initially it was just like a structural thing to teach the audience how to keep score during the final scene. It's like in Invictus, that movie about rugby, where they have to stop and explain how rugby works to the American audience before they. And so that's where it originally came from. And then out of that, it just kept all these more, because there's so many characters there. Mel Wolf's there, being a jerk in the most charming way possible. Yeah. And Ruth and Marty are there, and it's a I don't want to spoil the movie, but it's a huge turning point in the film.
Spoiler alert. Yeah, she gets on the Supreme Court.
That's the moment she gets on the Supreme Court. And so it becomes this sort of crucial moment, because all the main characters sort of reach a big turning point in their relationships moving forward in the film. But it was made up.
Yeah, but it was really important to the justice to have Polly Murray in the film and Gerald Gunther, her teacher. And Polly Murray, you could do a movie just on her alone. And so in that way, it was paying tribute and honor to what they had achieved and done in the civil rights movement.
I think there's something to Ruth's credit that she didn't give me very many big notes about how she wanted the movie to work, but the one that she gave me was, well, the two that she gave me were get Marty right, and she said, I just don't want people to think that I invented this area of the law, as if it never occurred to anyone before me that women should be considered people under the 14th Amendment. And she said, I built my career on the shoulders of women who came before me, like Dorothy Kenyon, like Polly Murray, and people should know that. I'm like, what am I supposed to do with that note? And so as you see in the film, Polly's in that scene, and Dorothy Kenyon plays a big role, played by Kathy Bates, who's incredible.
So one of the things I noticed a lot was the film portrays this really special relationship between mothers and daughters. So there's a lot of Ruth with her daughter, with Jane, but then there's also glances of Ruth at her mother's picture and sort of the sentiments her mother had shared with her. And as you were developing sort of the dialogues that go on between Jane and Ruth in the film, were those some insights that Justice Ginsburg had shared with you, or that potentially Jane had as you thought about them, or were they sort of just crafted from sort of a lot of them? I could actually imagine myself and my mother sort of having some of those conversations at home, but
absolutely
for the development side of it.
No, I mean none of the dialogue was real dialogue. It was taken based on research. I remember at one point I said to my mom, I was like, oh, I'm having trouble figuring out how to write Jane. She goes, oh, that's easy. Just write Clara, who's Jane's daughter. And I was like, oh, I know how to do that. Because they're like a family of really strongly opinionated women who do not hold back, which is what we love about them most of the time. And I will say that right after we saw this, we had a screening for the family, and we went out for dinner, and Clara goes, Mom, is that what you were like when you were a teenager? And Jane tried to hedge, and she hesitated for a second. And Ruth just busts in and goes, "Yes." I think that dynamic of being a fighter and how you learn it from your parents, but also you can't admit that to yourself that you got it from your parents.
I can invite anyone to come up to the mics. I'll continue to ask some questions, but if you can make your way up there if you have any questions.
How is Justice Ginsburg doing these days with her ribs?
She's fantastic. She has other ribs.
Okay.
She's already back at work and back in the gym. So
Great, good to hear. And second, with this nature of Hollywood coming out with sequels, is her life, so grand and so epic. Are we going to see a sequel on the base of Sex 2?
Well,
I'm not writing it.
That's very interesting. I think the other film would be her relationship with Justice Scalia, and I think that would be
the one to make.
A great story to tell.
Yeah, it's pretty private.
All right, I gotta go. I have to write that.
Thank you.
Thank
Can't wait
you.
to see the movie.
Thank you.
That was a good answer, the Scalia answer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. I wanted to ask about just kind of the ongoing conversation socially and politically. And I'm sure the creative process took quite a few years. And over those period of years, the conversation has really kind of grown as far as the women's rights with Me Too and whatnot. How did kind of the social escalation of all of these issues either inform or weigh on your creative process?
Is that me or you?
I think anyone who wants to weigh in.
It was interesting when we were shooting it because all the Harvey Weinstein and Kevin Spacey, all those things were breaking literally around. So we were all sort of showing up on sets, going like, "Have you read that? Or with this, that?" It just felt like there was this avalanche of things happening. It didn't really, or at least for me, it didn't really affect what we were doing, as far as because we already had our story in place. We weren't really changing anything on the fly because some asshole, got into trouble, so we just sort of kept doing what we were doing. If anything, it sort of added to the, we weren't timing this movie with these movements, but of course, telling more stories about our life feels more relevant in this time where we feel like we're taking enormous steps backwards, or at least the last couple of years.
I feel like it changes the experience as a viewer. Or
Yeah.
because when I started this movie in 2011, I started saying to people, I'm going to write a movie about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and they would be like, well, the biggest problem is nobody knows who Ruth Bader Ginsburg is. And it's like now, as you said, she's like this. She's become this pop icon, and that all happened after the movie was written. And so it's sort of my experience of, like, I thought I was writing the movie that was going to introduce the world to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and then it becomes like for me now, what the movie feels like it's about in a lot of ways is it's still about how Ruth changed the country, but it's about how she changed the country. And like today, looking at it in 2018, it becomes about how she changed the country by convincing people who disagreed with her to agree with her, rather than trying to destroy the people who disagreed with her. And that feels like, now for me as a viewer, that feels like the poignant lesson of the movie, is like there was a time when we didn't try to destroy each other. And maybe we can get back to that if we are willing to like learn what Ruth has to teach us.
As you were doing some of the research, or as you were putting together the film, was there anything that you learned about Justice Ginsburg that you, during the making, that you wanted to include in the film, but either she vetoed or didn't want, or that you just couldn't fit in to the storyline?
Well, I should say for the record, there was never a time that she ever said, oh, I don't want that in the movie. There was, I mean, the only reason she would do that is if the law is wrong or the way the law was practiced was wrong. But she never once gave a note based on ego, which is, I think, really kind of incredible, because she went through I sent her the script the first time, and she's like, oh, Daniel, I'm in the middle of reading the Affordable Care Act. Can you call me back in 20 minutes? And I'm like, okay. And then I
20 minutes?
Yeah, exactly.
She read it in 20 minutes?
Well, she was in the middle, so 40 minutes. And so then I call her back, and she's like, okay, page 1. And then she goes through it like a contract. And she'll be like, literally, I mean, like the opening line of the screenplay is like a pair of heels amongst a sea of loafers. And she's like, here on page 1, you have me wearing a pair of heels. But in those days, I used to walk to Harvard, and so I never would have worn heels in those days. And I was like, this is how this is going to go? Like, buckle in, like we're going. And then I have to argue it with her, right? Because that's what you want to do, is get into a debate with Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Yeah, you're going to win that.
Yeah, well, I did win that one. The heels are in the movie.
Yeah.
It's like, it's orientation. It's a special day. And then we get to the like scenes where she fumbles. And I'm going, oh no, what's she gonna do? If we have to go 10 minutes on the heels, what are we gonna do when we get to that? And she's like, and skip the next 5 pages. And I'm like, really? And she said, yeah. And I was like, well, because you kind of fumble over here. I don't know why I decided to negotiate against myself, but you kind of fumble over here. And she goes, oh yeah, it has to be that way. It's more dramatic. And you're like, oh, okay, that's nice. Yeah.
Fair enough. Speaking of the heels in the beginning, one of the things I thought was really poignant, but also really interesting in watching the film is how many moments. And maybe it's based on sort of, like you mentioned, this last year of sort of the political discourse and the conversation that's been heightened. But all of the moments where she's the only woman in either literally in the room or even in the conversation, from the opening scene to obviously the dean's remarks in Harvard, the elevator rides up to the interviews. Yes. I mean, just moment after moment throughout the film. I assume that was intentional.
Very intentional.
Spotted. And it works really well.
There were 9 women. I would only put maybe 1 or 2 in the same frame, because in a sea of men, they would be just little dots on a map.
Right. The dinner party that is hosted, was that something pulled? Was the dinner party hosted by the dean of Harvard for the ladies, as he called them, who had been accepted that year and quote taking the spots from men? Yes. Is that sort of verbatim as how it went?
It is exactly.
I have been accused of being heavy-handed in writing that scene, because people are like, clearly that couldn't have happened. I'm like, no, that's exactly how that went down.
The only thing different from how it happened was we put it at a dining room table. And from what I can gather, what we can gather, it was in a room where they were
small
sitting.
Tables.
Small table. But it felt more, the visual felt stronger to put it at a table, because she dropped the ashtray in reality. It just felt better to drop it off a dining room table where people are smoking while you're eating, which doesn't happen.
This is the 50s.
Yeah.
Very 50s.
Please.
Pointing out that you're.
Oh, thank you. Yes, please.
Hi. Thank you. I'd love to hear a bit about the casting process and finding the perfect person to portray Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Well, so we had a list of women who could play R.B.G. And I kept focusing on Felicity Jones. I kept looking at the young R.B.G. pictures and Felicity, and I felt there was a striking resemblance. And Felicity has a really deep, deep inner life from what I've seen in her work, and I felt that she could, it was just instinct. You have instinct. You have to go on your instincts when you're casting, because you never really know. Sometimes you, like I knew Justin actually could just inhabit this guy. And we don't often see Justin be this person. In fact, I've never seen you be this person. Yeah. So I didn't know he could actually do it, but I knew he could, if you know what I mean. I had not seen it before, but I knew he was the right guy. And beautifully, beautifully performed. But, you know, finding the, you know, Felicity Jones was a big key. And we sent her the script on a Thursday in London, and then she replied on Monday with a yes, which is very rare in our business. And, you know, it takes months for someone to read and someone to agree to something, and she immediately agreed to it. And then there was Armie Hammer, who I've never seen do this kind of role either, but I had a real desire and hunch that he did, that he had it in him, because I always thought he was charming, and he never really played a guy like this. And he's the only one I wanted. It was like I was at the agency, and they had, you go through this process where the agents show you, it's horrible to say this in front of an actor.
I know what happened. It's not like, what happens, Mimi?
You're in this room, and they give you all these pictures and resumes. You have your own lists anyway, and you go through them, and no, yes. It's like, it's horrible to
Binders full of us.
But I just knew that Armie could inhabit this character and bring his unique charm and wit to it. And I also loved the height difference. And I thought that was really...
Which was accurate.
Yeah, because Marty was tall and Ruth is a little tiny, beautiful woman. And I really loved the idea of this kind of frame, which is really hard to do, and which goes to picking the format of how you shoot something. So this was shot in 1.85, and 2.35 is a much shorter frame and stretched out. And with such a tall person and such a shorter person, you want a ratio that's like this, and also to fit the Supreme Court in a shot. And how far back do you put your camera to get this wide shot? Well, in format 1.85, you can do it. I don't know if that's interesting, but...
Extremely. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just want to add, because I've known Ruth and Martin Ginsburg for a very long time, that their portrayals of my aunt and uncle are uncanny. It's really kind of freaky.
A final question for you all. So the film portrays Ruth as herself, obviously, as a working mother who can kind of do it all. She's top of her class at Harvard. She's attending her courses and her husband's courses. She's caring for her husband during his illness. She's raising 2 children. She's working a full-time job as a professor, and in her spare time, she sets in motion changes that are really sort of reshaping women's rights and human rights. What is the message that you're hoping that particularly any viewers, but particularly women and girls, are taking away from this film after they watch it?
Well, I hope that women and particularly young women take away that they can do anything. Women can do anything. And that you use your voice to make this world a better place.
Go for it.
I was going to say, one of the things that I like so much about, I don't know what, I hope people take away, obviously, a sort of a renewed or first time or whatever interest in her life and obviously all the things she went on to do. But one of the things I really liked about this, just as a woman in a film, as a lead in a film, is that, oftentimes mothers or professionals are portrayed as sort of like, I'm a working mom, but I can't get work right, or like, but I can't get mother, like mothering is, well, there's just always like a give and a take, it's like it's a her career is great, but, at home it's a mess, and, or home's great and work's a mess. And Ruth really didn't really have, she just really did everything really well, and just by dint of extremely hard work. So I haven't really seen that represented so beautifully, in a film before. So I hope people take away her work ethic. And also the fact that she hasn't just done an enormous amount. These are not things that can be undone, the things she's done. You know, when you create strong case law, you know, that's not a plant you can just unpluck and, you know, throw away. You know, that's there for good, you know, and she made a lot of very extremely permanent changes in our country.
Yeah, may I just add one thing before?
Of course.
I just wanted to add that, you know, she didn't do it alone. You know, she did it
That
with
was
Marty.
my thing.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just didn't want to leave that out. That, you know,
Interrupt and steal your thing. Go on.
all right, you say it.
No, I'm not doing that. Go for it.
Don't slip on that banana peel.
You know, that they had an equal partnership. That was a real metaphor for the film, and that you know, that love and family are the most important thing in life is connectivity, and how you share your life and the choices you make in choosing the people you love and that love you. Very important.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I kind of, with all respect, disagree with the formulation of the question. It's not that Ruth did all those things. Ruth and Marty did all those things. And I can tell you as a guy from experience, the bar to be considered a supportive father and a supportive husband and a good father is like incredibly low. Like I take my kids to school every day and people are like, you're the best father in the world. Meanwhile, my wife's curing cancer and is made to feel guilty that she's not like baking for bake sales. And so, you know, I just feel like, I hope that that's a walk away from the film, is that, you know, my wife and I were so benefited from having Ruth and Marty as our role models for what a marriage can be, that, you know, part of the reason for writing this is I realized I was in this privileged position to share that with other people. So if nothing else, the movie is a great date movie, if only as a barometer, so that, like, if you walk out of the theater and the guy's like, that guy couldn't exist, like, just run away, like, you know.
Right, it was. Well, it is a beautiful love story, and then also, you know, adding on the sort of monumentous changes that she, with others, helped to put for our country's laws is pretty incredible. So,
Yeah.
thank you all for coming here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.